Well, I hope I'm nicely framed up. I tried my best to frame this shot as well as possible because actually the screen of my XT5 broke last week. I didn't do anything specific with it. It just from one moment to another just decided to break, which is on the one hand a good thing because now I finally have a reason to get this camera properly serviced, while all the little multiple issues I had with this camera was simply not enough to have it serviced and gone for 6 weeks because it is on repair. But on the other hand, it's of course very, very bad, especially since I use my screen for 99% of the shots I compose, and now I have to use the viewfinder. And let's say it doesn't really get me into the perspectives of photos that I would like to take. Anyway, in today's video, we're going to talk about travel photography, and more specifically, an issue you can probably relate to, which is that we take a lot of gear with us just in case. Ultra wide angle lens, standard lens, medium telephoto, fast 50mm lens. And most of the time we don't use that equipment. So I have actually fully ditched that philosophy, and at this point I'm only traveling with one single lens no matter where I go. But on a recent trip to Slovenia and Croatia, I have actually decided to just travel with this little guy here, which is a 50mm equivalent prime lens. And in today's video, I want to share with you why I think this is such a fantastic focal length for traveling. And of course, it doesn't have to be this specific 50mm lens, but it can be any 50mm lens. But stay till the end because I'm actually going to show you why I think this is actually the best 50mm lens for Fuji X mount. So I would say, let's get started. And the first reason why you should choose a 50mm lens over anything else is the sheer versatility that this lens gives you. There is a reason why people tend to use this as a general purpose lens. It has minimal distortion and a nice emphasis on your subject for portrait photography. It also allows you to pick out little moments during event photography, and it even is decent for street photography as it is wide enough to still capture the bigger picture, but tight enough to enable some emphasis on your subject. Additionally, I've used this lens for landscape photography, and while usually landscape photographers tend to prefer wide lenses or even ultra wide angle lenses, landscape photography is very much possible on a 50mm lens too. I'd even argue that it is easier to do landscape photography on a 50mm because the tighter field of view eliminates many distractions that might creep into your photo, especially if you're like me and only a modest landscape photographer. Additionally, I've recently also shot action photography on this lens, and it actually gives you some working distance because with a wide angle lens you would probably stand on the track where the mountain bikers would probably run you over, but with a 50mm lens you can stand next to it and even put some emphasis on your subject by shooting reasonably wide open. Additionally, starting from a 50 you can actually crop this lens to telephoto areas like 75, 85mm easily possible, or here for instance I have actually cropped this photo from this to this, making the composition more concise, and honestly the quality looks still amazing. And of course the lens can be a bit constraining at times because a 50mm is still not necessarily a wide angle lens anymore. So that means that you actually have to get creative, which leads me to the second point, which is that 50mm unlocks creative constraint. The 50mm is sometimes constraining, which leads to you having to rethink, okay, what do I actually want to have in my frame and what do I want to leave out? And sometimes it might also mean that you have to get a step back, or even if you want to, for instance, shoot a specific building, you have to go further up a mountain or up into the distance to get it all framed up. And this creative constraint really improved the way I photograph. The next reason why the 50mm is such a fantastic lens is because the field of view is super natural to us. Because first of all, it is very close to what the human eye can perceive. So generally speaking, we have with our eyes, since we have two of these eyes, ultra wide angle coverage basically. But what you can actually reasonably focus on at the same time is really very much limited to a very specific area in the scene that is close to what you see when you shoot through a 50mm lens. But beyond coverage and what you can focus on at the same time, the 50mm actually also has a very specific way of how foreground elements and background elements relate to each other. Because generally speaking, when you see something in real life and you shoot it on a wide angle lens like a 28 or a 35mm, that element you want to focus on actually looks much further away than you perceive it with your real eye, while everything in the foreground looks much, much, much bigger than it looked to you with your real eye, which is because everything that's in the background will be made smaller on a wide-angle lens, obviously, and everything in the foreground, so closer to your lens, will appear bigger. But when you shoot on something like a 50mm lens, for instance, everything in the distance appears closer to the way you see it with your real eyes, especially in the way how it relates to the foreground. So if I want to create memories that really reflect how I perceived a scene to be, then the 50mm is definitely the most natural choice over a wide-angle lens, or even an 85mm lens where everything might just look a bit too close and the focal length is just a bit too restricting to still capture the bigger picture. And now let's get to my favorite part of the 50mm lens, which is that I can get close without being intrusive. It is often said that if your photo is not good enough, then you are not close enough. To back up my previous argument, if you have a wide-angle lens like a 28 or 35mm lens, then you have to get closer to your subject in order to fill the frame and also make your subject appear bigger and more real to what you perceived with your real eye. And I'm personally a photographer who doesn't like to get very close to people. I really dislike being intrusive, and I don't feel particularly good if I'm close to people and obviously taking their photo. But the tighter field of view on a 50mm means that I'm not standing on people's feet and I still get a tight field of view. But at the same time, the 50mm is wide enough that you still included in the scene and feel part of the scene rather than being a distant observer, as it might be the case if you shoot on something tighter like an 85mm lens. Here, for instance, this is a photo I took recently in Ljubljana, and you can see that the girl is looking back and actually looking into the camera. She has spotted me because I'm still not that far away, but at the same time I'm not that intrusive creep that has to go very close because I'm shooting on a 28mm lens. So if you want to capture something personal while not being intrusive, the 50mm is the way to go. And the next reason why I think the 50 is so fantastic is because it literally comes in all shape and forms. Generally speaking, no matter what system you shoot on, you have at least 3 to 4, if not more options of 50mm lenses you can choose from. In the Fuji lineup, for instance, you have a budget XC version of the 50mm equivalent lens. It is very plasticky, but it's also very cheap, and you can pick it up for like $100 second hand. Then, of course, you have a very professional 33mm f1.4 lens that you can use, which is arguably the best 50mm lens. And the reason why I actually prefer this lens here, which is the mid-range 35mm f2 by Fujifilm, is because Fujifilm has understood that there is a lot of people out there who do not need an f1.4 aperture because of size reasons and because that f1.4 apertures is also sometimes a bit overkill, to be honest, but want to have no compromises when it comes to build quality. And this lens here is fully built from metal. It comes with an aperture ring. It is fully weather sealed, and I've really pushed this lens through all kinds of weathers, and honestly it's a lens I would never like to replace in my lineup, which also explains why it's at this point the oldest lens that I have owned and never sold. And the only thing that's really rubbish about this lens is the lens hood that comes with the lens out of the box, and that's the reason why I've actually replaced it very quickly with a very, very premium third-party lens hood that I've actually linked you down below, so feel free to check it out. And honestly, I'm not arguing that the 50mm is the undebatable best travel lens. I just made you hopefully very compelling arguments as to why it is. So if you want to check out how you can compose on a 35mm lens, so a wide angle lens, then I highly recommend you check out this video up here. And with that being said, thank you so much for tuning in today, and I hopefully see you very soon. Bye.